The courtroom was filled with an eerie silence, the only sound the sharp crack of the gavel, echoed by gasps from the gallery. Judge Monroe slammed it down with a finality that sent tremors through the room. The air was thick, the tension palpable. At the witness stand, a tremulous voice shattered the stillness, speaking a truth so devastating that even the seasoned officers of the law froze in disbelief. Margaret Jenkins, the prosecutor, sat still for a moment, her eyes locked onto the defendant, Ryan Carter, a man whose once pristine reputation was now tainted by an accusation that would forever alter his life. His face was pale, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The jury, a mix of expressions, disbelief, curiosity, skepticism, looked on as if in a trance. A coffee cup tipped, its contents splashing across the cold, hard floor. The judge's eyes darted across the room, unable to mask the shock. The truth had come, and with it, an irreversible twist in the case. What started as a battle over facts had now become a fight for survival. Reputations, lives, and families hung in the balance. The air in the courtroom felt like it was crackling with an electric charge, and for the first time, Ryan understood just how fragile his world had become. As the room held its collective breath, Margaret Jenkins, the prosecutor, stood up slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor with a rhythmic certainty. "The truth is out now," she said, her voice steady but cold. The gallery was frozen in place, as if afraid to move. Ryan Carter sat motionless, his face betraying a mix of confusion and fear. His lawyer, Sam Johnson, a seasoned defense attorney with salt and pepper hair, leaned in and whispered, "Don't say a word, just let them talk." His grip on Ryan's arm was firm, a reminder of how little control they had over the unfolding events. Ryan nodded slightly, his throat dry. The prosecutor's words rang through the room, each syllable heavy with the weight of what was at stake. His life, his freedom, hung in the balance, and the courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a battleground where personal demons would be exposed. The clock seemed to stop as everyone waited for the next move. The defense attorney, Sam Johnson, could feel the weight of every second ticking by. His gaze was unwavering as he turned to Ryan. "Stay composed. We're in this together," he whispered. Ryan's jaw clenched. His mind raced, but his body remained frozen. The prosecution's next move would determine everything. Every word from Jenkins felt like an attack, cutting deeper into the fragile facade he had spent years building. The jury's eyes were on him, some judging, others sympathetic. Ryan felt his pulse quicken, his hands now clammy. The room was a pressure cooker, and he was the meat caught in the middle, unable to escape. Across the room, Jenkins prepared for the next piece of her strategy, her eyes flickering over Ryan's face as she strategized her next words. The truth was coming out, and it was no longer a matter of proving innocence. It was a race against time to stop the unraveling of everything Ryan had ever known. The prosecutor's voice cut through the air, each word like a hammer striking the final nail. "We have the evidence," Margaret announced. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Ryan's breath hitched. This was it, the moment that would either break or make him. His fingers tightened around the armrest. "Don't react," Sam whispered again, his grip tighter this time, urging Ryan to stay calm. The evidence Margaret had alluded to had been carefully crafted, designed to twist the knife in the most agonizing way possible. And in that moment, as the document was handed to the judge, Ryan realized that the fight was far from over. It had only just begun. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about proving his innocence. This was about fighting for his life. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder now, marking every second that slipped away from Ryan. "This isn't over," Sam muttered under his breath, his voice carrying the weight of a promise that felt increasingly impossible to keep. Ryan nodded, though his confidence was beginning to waver. The prosecutor had delivered a devastating blow, and Ryan knew they were just getting started. He had to dig deep now, find whatever strength he had left. The gallery was quiet, the only sound the shuffle of papers and the soft breathing of the onlookers. In this courtroom, however, everyone knew that nothing was certain, not the verdict, not the truth, and certainly not the end. The tension in the courtroom had reached a new peak. Margaret Jenkins, the prosecutor, was making her case with calculated precision. Every word from her lips seemed to carve deeper into the defense's fragile position. The jury, on edge, hung on to her every statement. The defendant, Ryan Carter, is a man whose truth has been hidden for far too long, Margaret declared, her voice steady, yet filled with authority. She pointed directly at him, her gaze unwavering. Ryan's throat tightened, his heart pounding in his chest as the room seemed to close in on him. He looked around, feeling the eyes of the jury upon him, judging, scrutinizing his every breath. Sam Johnson, his defense attorney, stood tall, trying to exude confidence, but even he couldn't mask the growing uncertainty. Ryan's life, once in his own hands, now felt like it was slipping through his fingers, carried away by Margaret's relentless words. Ryan's mind raced, his thoughts a jumbled mess of confusion, anger, and fear. How had they gotten here? He tried to focus on Sam's whispered words, but they felt distant now, like they were spoken from another world. "Stay focused, Ryan. We've got one shot at this," Sam urged quietly. But how could Ryan focus when the walls were closing in? He glanced at the jury again, his gaze meeting that of an elderly woman in the front row. Her eyes were cold, unwavering, as though she had already made up her mind. The weight of the moment crashed down on him. His past, his secrets, everything that he had tried to keep buried was being dragged into the light, and there was no turning back. He knew that if he didn't regain control now, everything would fall apart. But where was the truth? And who would listen to it? A new witness was called, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. The courtroom grew quieter, the tension thickening as everyone turned to see who would take the stand next. The witness, a former colleague of Ryan's from his business, walked slowly to the stand, his eyes never leaving the defense table. Ryan's stomach twisted. He recognized the man, Ethan Green. Ethan was an old friend, but as his testimony began, Ryan felt a pang of betrayal. Ryan Carter was always hiding something, Ethan stated, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed a hint of discomfort. The words stung, sharper than Ryan had expected. Was Ethan really going to throw him under the bus? He looked down at his hands, feeling the weight of everything crashing down again. His trust had been shattered, and now even those he once thought were allies were turning their backs. Ryan's thoughts were in a tailspin, his focus barely holding together. Sam leaned in again, this time more urgently. "We need to take control of this narrative, Ryan. The jury is getting lost in this. Focus." Ryan nodded, but the words seemed distant, like echoes in his mind. Ethan's words kept reverberating through him, always hiding something. His entire life was now defined by that accusation. As if hearing it enough times would make it true. The prosecutor's voice cut through his internal chaos. "This man," she said, gesturing toward Ethan, "was privy to Ryan Carter's deceit, and he's here to tell you everything you need to know." Margaret's voice was a weapon, sharp and precise. And Ryan? He felt like the target, exposed and vulnerable under the harsh courtroom lights. The walls were closing in, and with every passing moment, his chances of escaping this trial unscathed were growing slimmer. With every new revelation, Ryan's grip on his own story weakened. The lies were stacking up, and it seemed like no matter how hard he tried to explain, no one would listen. His past, his choices, everything was being scrutinized, dissected piece by piece. Margaret's eyes glinted as she leaned forward, her voice dripping with confidence. "It's clear. The defendant has been hiding the truth from all of us." Each word seemed to cement the growing doubt in the minds of the jury. Ryan's heart raced, but he couldn't allow the panic to show. Not now. He couldn't let them see him break. Sam placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, but the comfort was fleeting. Outside the courtroom, the press was already spinning the story. And soon, the world would know what he had done, or what they thought he had done. But in this moment, in this room, everything was about to change. The courtroom was abuzz with murmurs when a new witness was called to the stand. The moment they saw him, Ryan's heart skipped a beat. Daniel Green. Daniel, an old colleague of Ryan's, was the last person Ryan had ever expected to testify. His appearance was like a ghost from Ryan's past, one that he'd long buried. Daniel's gaze met Ryan's, and there was no warmth in his eyes, only cold, calculated judgment. Ryan Carter didn't just hide the truth, Daniel began, his voice steady but full of accusation. He manipulated everyone around him, using people for his own gain. Ryan's mind raced, desperately searching for the words to stop this, but nothing came. His past was catching up with him, and Daniel was now a living embodiment of every mistake Ryan had made. The truth was being twisted, and Ryan was powerless to stop it. The entire courtroom was hanging on Daniel's every word, and Ryan felt like he was sinking into the chair beneath him. Ryan's mind was in turmoil, replaying the moments with Daniel. How had things gone so wrong? The betrayal in Daniel's voice was unmistakable, and Ryan felt his own sense of betrayal sink in. This is a game for him, Sam Johnson, his defense attorney muttered, his voice low but urgent. You need to take control back, Ryan. But Ryan could barely think, his eyes locked on Daniel as the man continued his testimony, detailing how Ryan had used people for personal gain. The jury's gaze was unyielding, every eye fixed on Ryan, every word Daniel spoke chipping away at his defense. The prosecutor, Margaret Jenkins, stood beside Daniel, nodding along, her expression smug. With each word from Daniel, Ryan felt like he was losing himself, losing control of the narrative. The walls of the courtroom felt suffocating, and for the first time, Ryan wasn't sure he could win this fight. Ryan's head was spinning. He couldn't remember the last time he felt this vulnerable. Every inch of his body screamed for him to stand up, to refute Daniel's claims, but the words caught in his throat. He's lying, Ryan finally managed to say, though his voice cracked under the weight of the words. Sam leaned in, his whisper urgent. You can't fight this here. Keep your head down. We need to play it cool. But how could Ryan keep his composure when the entire world seemed to be watching? The prosecutor smiled slyly, taking a step toward the witness stand. Do you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? She said. The defendant's first defense. He's already denying the truth. Ryan felt his world narrowing. The more he tried to fight back, the deeper he seemed to sink into the lie they were weaving around him. Every time he opened his mouth, the hole seemed to get deeper. As the day wore on, Ryan could feel the weight of the case shifting. Each new piece of evidence, each new witness made it harder to breathe. He watched as the prosecution began to make their closing arguments. Margaret stood confidently, her voice smooth and deliberate. Ryan Carter's entire life has been a carefully constructed lie, she said, her words carrying the weight of years of preparation. He thought he could deceive everyone, from his closest friends to the people he worked with. But the truth always comes out. Ryan's heart sank as he realized the full extent of the battle he was facing. But this wasn't just about a crime anymore. It was about his entire existence, his reputation, everything he had built. Sam squeezed his shoulder, a silent gesture of support. But Ryan knew the truth. He was losing. There was no way to change the narrative now. The truth had been twisted, and the damage was done. Ryan's world felt like it was collapsing. His life had been laid bare, and there was no going back. The defense team had no more tricks up their sleeves, no more surprises. Sam Johnson's face was etched with frustration, but Ryan saw something else in his eyes, concern. "We've fought as much as we could, Ryan," Sam said softly, his voice tinged with defeat. "The rest is up to the jury." Ryan nodded, but the weight of Sam's words crushed him. The jury was out of reach now. He had tried to protect himself, to hide the truth, but it was too late. As the final arguments were made, Ryan wondered if he would ever see his life the same way again. The courtroom was filled with hushed voices as the closing moments of the trial played out. There was nothing left for him to do but wait for the verdict. The courtroom was on edge. The tension between the prosecution and defense had reached its boiling point, and everyone knew this was the moment that would determine everything. Margaret Jenkins, standing tall, prepared to make her final statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice firm and unyielding, "we've seen the evidence. The defendant, Ryan Carter, has lied to all of us. His entire life has been one elaborate charade, a carefully constructed story that hides the truth of who he really is. Ryan's stomach dropped as the words hit him like a fist. His life, everything he had built, was now on trial. The prosecutor's eyes glinted with determination, and she turned toward the jury, every word calculated to drive the final nail in his coffin. Ryan, trapped in the spotlight, felt every second of the trial weigh heavier than the last. There was nothing left to do but listen as Margaret concluded. The truth is clear. Ryan Carter is guilty. The question now is, will you let him walk free? The jury shifted in their seats, and Ryan could feel his pulse quicken, the heat of their gaze piercing through him. Ryan could feel the weight of every second as the prosecutor's words echoed in his head. "You've been hiding behind your lies for far too long," she had said. He wanted to stand up, scream that it wasn't true, but the words never came. The defense had been silent for too long, and now it was his turn to take control. Sam Johnson leaned in, his voice a low whisper. "It's time, Ryan. We have to change the game." With a deep breath, Ryan stood, his legs shaking beneath him. The room fell into a hushed silence as all eyes turned toward him. For the first time in this trial, Ryan was going to speak for himself. "I am not the man they say I am," Ryan began, his voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. "I never wanted any of this. All I've ever done was try to protect those I love. But somehow, somewhere, the truth became twisted." He glanced at the jury, locking eyes with them. "I am not a liar. I am not a monster." The words hung in the air, charged with emotion. Ryan took a deep breath, knowing that this moment could make or break him. Ryan's declaration had shocked the room. The jury was no longer just looking at him, they were listening. But as he spoke, Ryan noticed something strange. The prosecutor wasn't reacting with the confidence she once had. Margaret stood still, her lips pursed, her eyes narrowing. It was as though something had shifted in the room. The air felt heavier, more suffocating. "You think that by speaking you can erase the truth?" Margaret finally said, her voice tight. "It doesn't work that way, Mr. Carter. The truth is not what you want it to be." Her words were calculated, designed to provoke. But this time, Ryan didn't flinch. He stood his ground. "I'm not asking you to believe me," Ryan replied, his voice growing steady. "I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I'm not the person they want you to think I am. There's more to this story, and I'm the only one who can tell it." He looked directly at the jury, his gaze unwavering, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the pivotal moment that could change everything. The prosecutor's argument was sharp, and her closing statement was nothing short of a final blow. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Margaret said, her voice unwavering. "You've heard his words, but words are meaningless without truth. And the truth is that Ryan Carter is guilty of everything he's accused of." Ryan felt his heart drop as Margaret's words hung in the air. His chance at redemption seemed to slip further away. He looked at the jury again, hoping for a sign that they were hearing him, but their faces were unreadable. He had given everything, poured his heart out, and yet it felt like it wasn't enough. Sam Johnson stood, his movements stiff, his eyes scanning the jury. "We're not done yet," he whispered to Ryan. "We still have one final shot." But as the jury began to deliberate, Ryan knew that whatever happened next would be out of his hands. The truth had been laid bare, but would they believe it? The jury had deliberated for hours. The room was filled with anticipation, each second dragging on like an eternity. Ryan could barely breathe, his chest tight with the weight of uncertainty. Sam had left his side moments ago to speak with the judge, but Ryan hadn't been able to leave his seat. He glanced over at Margaret, who stood at the prosecutor's table, her posture as rigid as ever. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of doubt. As the doors to the jury room opened, the air in the courtroom shifted. The bailiff entered, holding the verdict. The judge, his face unreadable, looked at the jury. "Have you reached a verdict?" he asked, his voice deep and steady. The jury foreperson stood, holding the piece of paper. Ryan felt his heart beat in his throat as she read aloud the words that would either condemn him or set him free. "Woo, the jury, Find the defendant. The room went silent, every eye trained on the foreperson, waiting for the verdict that would determine Ryan's fate. The jury had been deliberating for hours, but to Ryan, it felt like days. Every second that ticked by seemed to pull him deeper into the uncertainty. His mind raced, replaying every moment of the trial, the accusations, the betrayal, the lies. Was there hope? Or had they already decided his fate? Sam Johnson, his defense attorney, sat across from him, his face unreadable. "We've done everything we could," Sam said quietly, his voice a mix of exhaustion and resignation. Ryan's throat tightened as he stared down at his hands, his fingers trembling. "What if it's not enough?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they don't believe me?" Sam leaned in, his gaze softening. "We've presented the truth, Ryan. The rest is out of our hands now. All we can do is wait." Ryan nodded slowly, but the gnawing feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. Every minute that passed brought him closer to the moment of truth. The jury was returning, and soon he would know if his life would remain shattered or if redemption was possible. As the doors to the jury room finally opened, a hush fell over the courtroom. The foreperson stepped forward, holding the verdict. Ryan's heart hammered in his chest, his palms sweaty. "This is it," he whispered to himself, barely able to breathe. The judge, who had been silent throughout the proceedings, looked toward the jury, his gaze stern. "Have you reached a verdict?" he asked. The jury foreperson stood tall, her hands slightly shaking as she held the paper. Ryan's eyes fixed on the paper in her hands, as if willing it to tell him something, anything that would bring relief. "We have," the foreperson said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. The entire room seemed to lean forward, as if holding its breath, waiting for the verdict that would decide Ryan's fate. Sam Johnson sat beside him, his hand resting lightly on Ryan's shoulder, offering silent support as the world seemed to stop in this critical moment. The words felt like they came in slow motion. "We, the jury, find the defendant." The foreperson paused, and for a heartbeat, Ryan thought his heart might stop. Everything had led to this one moment, and it seemed to stretch on forever. "Guilty," she finally said. The word hung in the air, and Ryan felt the ground beneath him give way. His breath caught in his throat, and he could feel his world crashing down around him. Sam Johnson's face remained stoic, but Ryan could see the brief flicker of disappointment in his eyes. The prosecutor, Margaret Jenkins, stood tall, her face a mask of victory, but inside Ryan felt as though he was drowning. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, but Ryan couldn't focus on the noise. The judge raised his hand, silencing the room. "The court will reconvene tomorrow for sentencing," the judge announced. The moment was over, but the weight of it still pressed down on Ryan, suffocating him. The guilt of the verdict was a crushing blow, one that would haunt him forever. Ryan felt numb as the court session ended. His world had just been shattered, and he couldn't find the words to speak. He had prepared himself for the worst, but now that the verdict was in, it was worse than he could have imagined. "This isn't the end, Ryan," Sam said, his voice firm, though Ryan could hear the exhaustion in his tone. "We'll appeal. There's still a chance to fight this." But Ryan wasn't sure he could continue fighting. He had given everything he had to prove his innocence, and now the system had failed him. As they exited the courtroom, the press was waiting, the flashes of cameras like a million eyes staring at him. His face was a mask of defeat, but inside, he felt like he was unraveling. The weight of the media, the verdict, and the future ahead of him were almost too much to bear. "What happens now?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sam didn't respond right away, but his silence spoke volumes. There was no answer to that question. Not yet. In the solitude of the holding room, Ryan sat alone, staring at the floor. He was still trying to process the events that had just unfolded. The harsh reality of the verdict was settling in, and it felt like his entire life had been upended. "I didn't do this," he muttered to himself, his voice thick with disbelief. "I didn't deserve this." The door opened, and Sam entered, his expression grave. "Ryan," "We need to talk about the next steps," he said, though his voice lacked the usual conviction. Ryan didn't respond at first, his mind still reeling. "I thought the truth was enough," Ryan said quietly, his voice cracking. Sam sighed and sat across from him. "The truth doesn't always win, Ryan. Sometimes it takes more than just the facts." Ryan looked up at him, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. "What happens now?" Ryan asked. Sam was silent for a moment before responding. "We fight, but not just for the truth. Now, we fight for your future." Ryan sat in his cell, the cold metal bench beneath him a stark reminder of where he now belonged. His thoughts kept replaying the trial, how close he had come, how much he had fought, only to be brought down by secrets. Sam Johnson had visited him earlier that day, but his words of hope had felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. "We'll appeal," Sam had said. "The truth is still out there, Ryan." But what truth? His mind kept returning to the mysterious figure that had appeared during the trial, someone who seemed to know more than they were letting on. Had they been holding the key all along? Ryan's hands gripped the bench as a new sense of urgency flooded his chest. There was something about the last moments of the trial, something in the prosecutor's eyes, that had sparked a fire in him. What if this wasn't over? What if the truth, the real truth, was still waiting to be revealed? He couldn't let go. Not yet. The next morning, Ryan was called to a meeting. It wasn't his usual prison routine, and the suddenness of it made his heart race. When he entered the room, he saw a familiar face, Daniel Green, the man who had testified against him. Daniel sat across from him, his expression tense and guarded. "I didn't want to do this," Daniel said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But there's more to your case than you know." Ryan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and anticipation. Daniel looked around cautiously before continuing, his eyes darting from side to side. "I wasn't the only one who knew about what happened," Daniel confessed. "Someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes, someone who wanted you to fall." Ryan's mind raced. Was Daniel admitting to a conspiracy? Was this the breakthrough he had been waiting for? "Who?" Ryan asked, his breath shallow. But Daniel remained silent, his eyes betraying a fear that was too genuine to ignore. As Daniel's words hung in the air, Ryan's mind began to race. A conspiracy? Someone had been manipulating the case from the shadows? Ryan's heart pounded as the pieces of his life, his trial, the false accusations, the betrayal, began to fit together in ways he hadn't expected. "Who else knows about this?" Ryan asked, his voice shaking. Daniel hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously to the door. "I can't tell you everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you need to understand something. This was never just about you. You were the pawn in a much larger game." Ryan felt like the room was closing in on him. "Who's behind this?" he pressed, his fists clenching. Daniel lowered his voice, almost inaudible. "It's someone close to you. Someone you trust." Ryan froze. His mind went blank. Who could it be? The uncertainty was overwhelming. But one thing was clear. If he wanted to clear his name, he would need to uncover the truth buried deep beneath all the lies. Back in his cell, Ryan couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's words. A conspiracy? Someone close to him? He had trusted so many people, but who could have betrayed him? As the days passed, Ryan spent every waking moment turning over every possible scenario in his mind. He reviewed every conversation, every relationship, looking for a hint of something he had missed. But no matter how hard he tried, the answers eluded him. It wasn't until one quiet afternoon, when a guard handed him an envelope from his lawyer, that Ryan realized what he needed to do. Inside, there was a letter, an anonymous tip. It contained information about a meeting that had taken place the night before his trial began. Ryan read the letter over and over again, his hands shaking as the truth began to unfold. There was a name, someone who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, someone who had orchestrated everything. This was the breakthrough he had been waiting for, but it came with a new sense of dread. He knew what he had to do next. The revelation had hit Ryan like a sledgehammer. He now knew who was behind it all, the mastermind who had orchestrated his downfall. The name in the letter sent a shockwave through him, and for the first time in months, Ryan felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out there, but exposing it wouldn't be easy. With his newfound resolve, Ryan knew he had to act quickly. But the more he thought about it, the more dangerous it seemed. Whoever had pulled the strings behind the scenes wasn't going to give up their power easily. They would do whatever it took to silence him. But Ryan had come too far to back down now. He had to find a way to expose the truth, to clear his name, and to make sure that those who had betrayed him faced the consequences of their actions. His fight was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The courtroom was packed, and the air seemed to hum with anticipation. Ryan Carter stood before the judge, his heart pounding in his chest. His entire life had been a battle, but today felt different. Today was the day everything changed. The judge's gavel was poised in his hand, but there was a heaviness in the room, as if everyone was waiting for a final decisive moment. Ryan's lawyer, Sam Johnson, leaned in close, his voice a soft murmur. "This is it. We've done everything we can." Ryan nodded, his gaze fixed ahead, unwavering despite the nerves. The judge's voice echoed across the room, his words a quiet but firm command. "Ryan Carter, you have heard the arguments. The jury has deliberated. Now, it is time to hear the verdict." Ryan's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. Everything was about to be decided. The room fell silent as the judge's words filled the space, each syllable weighed down with finality. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Ryan Carter." The room was still. Ryan's heart pounded in his ears, his body tense with the hope that this moment would bring him the freedom he so desperately wanted. His mind raced. Had they believed him? Could the truth finally be enough to set him free? Sam Johnson's hand gripped his shoulder, a silent reminder to stay calm. As the judge continued, Ryan's breath caught in his throat, his mind whirling with thoughts of the past, the lies, and the betrayal. But in this moment, he could not afford to let fear overtake him. The judge paused, the words hanging in the air like a sentence he could not take back. "Guilty," the judge finally declared. The word was a blow to Ryan's chest, sending shockwaves of disbelief through him. His fight had been for nothing. He had been condemned. Ryan stood frozen as the reality of the verdict settled over him. The buzz of the courtroom faded into the background, replaced by the deafening silence in his mind. Sam Johnson spoke, his voice firm but gentle. "We'll appeal, Ryan. This isn't over." But Ryan barely heard him. The words felt hollow now, distant, as he struggled to process what had just happened. He had fought so hard, and yet the truth, his truth, hadn't been enough. The emotions that had been building inside him for weeks now felt like a crushing weight. He had trusted the system, had placed his faith in the justice he thought was possible. But today, the system had failed him. He turned to face his lawyer, his eyes searching for a glimmer of hope. "What now?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sam's eyes were filled with understanding, but also with the weight of the long road ahead. "Now we keep fighting," Sam said softly, his hand once again resting on Ryan's shoulder. The courtroom emptied slowly, the murmurs of conversation filling the space around Ryan. He stood alone for a moment, lost in thought. The reality of what had just transpired weighed on him like a heavy cloak. He had come into this trial believing in the power of truth, but now, the truth felt like a broken weapon, useless against the forces that had sought to destroy him. As the last of the spectators filed out, Ryan felt the cold weight of the chains that bound him. But something stirred within him. The fight wasn't over. There had to be more. There had to be someone out there who could help him. He couldn't just accept this fate. The injustice was too much to bear. "I won't stop," Ryan whispered to himself, his voice steady but filled with the fire of a man who had been pushed too far. "I'll find a way out of this." Later that evening, As Ryan sat in his prison cell, a sense of finality hung in the air. The world outside felt so far away, yet the weight of the trial lingered like an invisible force. The truth, he thought, was not yet lost, but the journey ahead was uncertain. The people who had betrayed him, who had made him a pawn in their game, would not go unpunished. He would make sure of that. His eyes flickered to the small window in his cell, where the faintest light filtered through, marking the passage of time. It was a small sliver of hope. Ryan knew this battle wasn't just about the trial. It was about something much larger. It was about fighting for justice, for the truth that had been buried beneath layers of lies. And he was willing to go as far as he had to, even if it meant taking on the system that had wronged him. The final chapter was far from written, and Ryan was ready for whatever came next.